Hi, welcome. I am on page 13. So this is Unit 7, Day 3, Basic Curves. What we're going to start doing is looking at the graphs of the trig functions, so sine and cosine is what we're going to start with. And this should be familiar, so this is like the unit circle, but I took a lot of the information out. Just looking for the 0, the coordinates x and y at 0 in terms of radians, pi over 2. Pi and 3 pi over 2, and then again finishing at 2 pi, so a full circle. Remember that sine is always the y coordinate and cosine is the x. So when you look at this, this is cos and sine. Again, cos and sine. This is cos and sine, and cos and sine. So what we're going to be doing is taking these values and actually making graphs with them. So what happens is you, for right now, we're going to have these same values going around, being on the x-axis. So the x-axis points are what we have here. 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. And we're going to do the same thing for the sine and the cosine graph. So over here on the cosine, I'm going to again have 0. And I'm kind of looking what's happening at each one of these points. I'm looking at what the cosine value is doing. So sorry, 0, pi over 2, pi, another key point, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. So I'm going to stay over here and start with the cosine. Don't know why I didn't put this first, but cosine first. So when I'm at 0, so it's like having the ordered pair of 0, 1, because that's 0 and the 1. So I'm taking the value here, and cosine value starts up here at 0. For cosine, I move to the next point at pi over 2. And the value for cosine is a 0, so pi over 2 is going to be a cosine. I come over here, I have at pi, the cosine value is -1, so now when you go to pi, it goes down to -1. I swing over here to 3 pi over 2. And the cosine value is a 0, so it goes back up. And then finish at 2 pi. At 2 pi, the value is a 1. So this vaguely looks kind of like a V curve. It's actually a repeating curve. This is one cycle, or also referred to as one period. So this is one cycle of the graph, because we can go around this circle as many times as we want. I would be repeating this pattern over and over. It's called a periodic function when the graph actually repeats itself over and over. So now that I've done that with cosine, the sine is going to have a similar appearance. It's just going to have the points are going to be a little bit different, because the sine and cosine and sine at these numbers are, you know, kind of almost like they're alternating a little bit. They start off different, but they use the same values. So looking at sine, the order pairs I'm using is 0 and 0. So the origin. The next one I have is pi over 2, and the sine value is 1. So I'm going up to 1 here for sine. At the pi value, the sine is 0. So at pi, sine is 0. At 3 pi over 2, the sine value is -1. So 3 pi over 2 is down here at -1. And then swinging back around for a full circle at 2 pi, the value of sine is 0 again. So it comes back up to the x-axis. And again, this is a periodic function. It doesn't quite look like the v, but it has part of it. It's actually shifted over a little bit. So the curves, the cosine curve and the sine curve, very much look like each other. They are periodic, meaning they go up and down, and if I were to do another cycle, they would go up and down again, and then another cycle would go up and down again. The domain are all the x values you can have, and for both of these, this is negative infinity to positive infinity. Again, there's your interval notation. The range is how high and how low it goes, so the small number first, so -1 to +1. Same here is -1 to +1. So they have the same features. And when it says period, this means how long does it take to do one full cycle? So how long does it take before it starts repeating itself? And for us, that's 2 pi. That can change in the future, and it will change. But one full cycle of the sine and cosine curves will be 2 pi. That's what we're starting with. All right, our key points we start at are 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Okay, so those are the basic curves for sine and cosine. So I'm just going to fill you a little bit in on page 14. I'm not going to do this whole thing. All right, so sometimes there will be a number in front of the curves, which was what we'll start with. That is referred to as the amplitude. The amplitude refers to how high or how low the graph goes. And it's always a positive value, saying it's going to go, instead of going up and down to 1 and -1, a 2 in front would change it to going up to 2 and down to -2. So that's what the a value does in front of the function. All right, we're always going to break the period into 4 parts. And the range for the sine wave of this is -1 to +1, or the interval notation was -1 to +1. All right, and because of the new amplitude, like I already did on the graph, the new range is -2 to +2. There's an interval notation, or if you wanted, you could write it in inequalities. All right, so what happens is the sine curve, you still have the same values on the x-axis, 0, pi over 2, because we haven't changed any of that, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Okay, when it says there's 4 parts, that means there's like 4 sections, so each section is between the 2 points. So here's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So when we do the curve, all that happens is the 0, 0 stays the same. Pi over 2 went up to 1, but now because of the multiplying by 2, it goes up to 2. It goes back down, so it goes up and down, and then down to -2. Instead of being -1, oh geez, whoopsie. How about 3 pi over 2? Instead of being down at -1, it goes down to -2, and then back to 2 pi. So one full cycle. So it's still doing the same thing, going up and down. Same things along the x-axis, but instead of going to 1 and -1, it goes up to 2 and -2. So this is where we're going to stop for now. We'll do more in class. See you later. Bye.